Everything that will be written here is true. It could be misinterpreted, but I'll explain everything as it is. I'm 21. When the events that I will tell you here happened, I was around 15 or 16. I was fascinated by abandoned buildings at that time, and the first one that I found that was close to my house was an abandoned hospital. This hospital was firstly built in the early 1900s as a sanatorium, then was bought in the late 1980s by the regional hospital to become a palliative care center. My first visit was the one that started all of the curiosity that I had about this place. In the beginning of the summer, I came to this 3-floor hospital. Our first goal was to take pictures of this beautifully decayed place. Everything was fine until we arrived on the 3rd floor. My friend suddenly started to panic and, being a bit aggressive, yelled, "Let me go out! Let me go out!" I first thought that he was doing a joke, but he looked really scared of something. Since I didn't want to leave, I accompanied my friend outside and then came back inside, alone. I wanted to take pictures of the empty corridors of the 3rd floor. The weird thing is that when I asked him about this a few minutes later, he didn't remember being aggressive or scared. All he knew was that we went outside together and I went back in. I didn't have any particular feeling about the place during the visit. I was just excited because it was my first time in an abandoned building. My second visit was with a different friend. I didn't tell her anything that happened during the last visit. Like the last time, things started to become weird when we arrived on the 3rd floor. I started to feel a little bad, like something was preventing me from breathing correctly. My friend told me a few minutes later that she was having the same weird feeling. We felt scared and didn't want to continue with this oppressive sensation, so we left. The 3rd time, I went to the hospital with a camcorder. I probably did the worst thing ever. Before our second visit together, we watched some paranormal videos on YouTube, and we wanted to get some answers about the 3rd floor. During the whole visit, we asked some questions to the supposed entities that lived in the hospital. We got what we interpreted as an answer in the basement. Since our last visit, things were moved and destroyed, probably by vandals. I asked, "Did you move anything here?" On the video, I could clearly hear, "It's not us." The other voice that I recorded was in the church part of the sanatorium. It happened just at the moment we were leaving. A voice whispering, "It's the death." The last thing we did this day was to go to one room of the 3rd floor and ask multiple questions and wait for answers while recording everything with a voice recorder, trying to get EVPs. After a few minutes, we saw a shadow moving really fast, and we heard what sounded like heavy footsteps running on broken glass just behind us in the dead-end corridor. I immediately ran to the direction of the noise. My friend and I looked everywhere in the hospital, but nobody was there. We ran out and left the area, promising that we would not try to get in contact with those entities again. The following night, I had sleep paralysis, and I don't often experience that. There was a black silhouette staring at me in front of my bed. This might have been a coincidence, but it was quite weird that it happened just after this scary episode. After all those experiences, I returned to the hospital alone after that, a few times actually. Sometimes I didn't have any bad feeling in any part of the hospital and was able to capture every picture that I wanted. Some other times, I had the feeling that I was not welcomed, was oppressed, and didn't have the courage to take the pictures that I had initially planned. As I told you, I was 15 or 16 when all of this happened. Now the building's sold and under security. If I had the same experience today, my judgment about the events would probably be different. My theory is the following. The voices we heard on the recordings were probably interpreted because we wanted them to be there. My friend's behavior in the third floor could have just been a strong case of panic. The bad feeling that I had on this floor might be because of the memories of my friend's reaction. My friend having the same feeling that I did is a little weirder. I first thought about something in the air like asbestos, dust, cracked paint, maybe even mold. But this theory doesn't work, as it was not happening every time I went there. The noises of the person running on cracked glass is still impossible for me to explain. Where did this person or animal go if it was one? All the rooms were opened. The noise was behind us in a dead-end corridor. We saw nobody running, and the noise only lasted a few seconds. What was that shadow behind us then? It wasn't ours. The sleep paralysis that I had after that, maybe it was just sleep paralysis. But maybe it was more. What do you think? Do you think that we encountered something that day? I work as a JR in a hospital, run by Sisters of the Catholic Convent. This hospital is pretty old, set almost in the early 1910s. Needless to say, quite a few buildings in the campus are old and eerie, and only just renovated. I have a bunch of stories, but I'll just share a few. I had night duty a few days back, and since there weren't any patients to attend to, I went to sleep in the room assigned to me in the emergency itself. A few minutes in, I felt extremely cold. It was the peak of summer, and this coolness just didn't feel right. I got up, switched on the lights, and went out calling the nursing staff. I told them I didn't feel comfortable sleeping in that room tonight. They were more than happy to entertain me the entire night. One of the staff is a dear friend, and she asked me if I wanted to hear a ghost story. I jumped in because now we're a crowd and there was less reason to be afraid, right? So she told me about this incident in the baby ward. It was the middle of the night. A mother walked up to the nurse's station, requesting a bowl to feed her child. One of the nurses noted down the details, the mother and the baby's name, and handed over the bowl. A few seconds later, the same nurse happened to look back and saw that the woman had no feet and was floating away in the air. She pointed it out to the other sister as well. After recovering from what they'd seen, the nurse fired up the system to check the patient's name, and, to their surprise, the discharge summary via the baby and mother's name showed up. The mother had died of postpartum hemorrhage after delivering a premature baby, and the baby too had passed away a few days later due to a neonatal infection. Another thing that happened occurred on the seafloor. This floor consists of private wards, and it's pretty posh. There's a call switch for each ward, which the patient rings in case they need something, and the bell sounds in the nurse's station. On one of my usual night duties, I was typing a discharge summary when the bell to Ward 7 rang. The nurses were on break and seemed not to hear it. My senior asked me to go check on it, in case it was our patient. I got up and walked through the dark corridor in search of room 7, which was at the very end of the alley. The lights were off, and it seemed that whoever was inside was sleeping. I knocked, but nobody opened. Strange sense of fear creeped through me, and for reasons I can't explain, I ran. I reached the nurse's station. My senior looked up at me, breathing heavily. He asked if I was all right. I told him that the room was dark and that nobody opened the door when I knocked. The nurses walked in at the same time and told me that there was nobody admitted to Ward 7 and that the bell often rang like that. They would never react unless somebody was actually admitted there. And then there was the story of SICU bed number 1. The curious case about this bed is that no matter who ends up on it, they eventually die, no matter how young or how healthy the patient is. We normally shift a patient after any surgery to the surgical ICU for observation for 24 hours. It's a precautionary measure. The incidents have pretty much been unnatural over the past few months, and there's no scientific explanation. Just a few days back, a 22-year-old boy was admitted for gallbladder surgery. He was shifted to the surgical ICU after surgery. A few hours after shifting, he developed breathlessness and died before intubation. Doctors usually don't like their patients assigned to SICU bed number 1. Even if the SICU is full, as soon as a bed vacates, a patient from number 1 immediately gets assigned to a number 2 bed. There's no backstory for this that I'm aware of. It's just something really strange that happens. I only ever talk about this because it's part of my healing process. It helps me deal with the trauma of losing my infant son. In 2007, I was 9 months pregnant with my last child. I'd had preeclampsia with previous pregnancies, and a placenta abruption with a pregnancy 7 years prior, so I was being monitored very closely. Not as closely as I should have been, but that's another story for another time. On the evening of December 12th, I became ill. I felt dreadful, and I looked at my abdomen and thought it looked rigid and strange. Instantly, I knew I was dying. I can't explain it, but simultaneously, I heard a whisper in my left ear. A soft, gentle whisper that said, "The baby has died." I instantly thought I was losing my mind, and I yelled to my son to call 911. We were in the middle of a winter storm, so our phones were dead. I finally got a neighbor to call my husband, who took me to the maternity ward of a large hospital. One of the most experienced nurses happened to be on duty, thank goodness, because I coded when I got to the floor. I had a 3rd-degree abruption. 4th degree is death. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and had to go on dialysis for a while. My ammonia levels were really high, so for a while I thought I'd given birth. I did get to hold him. He was beautiful with dark curls. When I'd got to the med-surg floor, I was coherent and trying to come to grips about why this had happened to me. One night I had awakened to voices. I thought it was my family in my room. My eyes were closed, but I was awake, and I heard what sounded like about 20 people talking about me. I was lying there, trying to understand what they were saying about me, but all of them were talking so fast and in a hushed tone. I opened my eyes to find nobody there, not a single soul. What scared me was as my eyes opened, one person said, "Shh." A second person said, "Shh." And then there was a collective, "Shh." I was terrified in a dark room with the door shut, and I had a hard time moving around because of my emergency C-section incision. I started calling for my husband, but he didn't answer. He would often sleep on the floor beside my bed, on a pull-out sofa chair. Suddenly a small, olive-toned girl of 6 or 7 years old appeared beside my bed. She had 2 curly ponytails and was dressed in a 1970s style clothing. I couldn't see her eyes, just dark shadows. She pointed to the other side of my bed and said, "He's over there." My husband had been on the left side of my hospital bed and was asleep. I turned back to face her and thank her, but she was gone. Having that experience in the hospital helped change my insight about death. I know I will see my infant son again one day. I also think that the people and voices I heard may have been people that had passed away at that hospital, as well as the little girl. I felt no threat at all, but I was scared because it was so unexpected. This isn't a shocking experience like many I've read, but this experience has made me return to a lost place and continuous experiences after that have made me return regularly. I've had paranormal activity in my attic ever since I visited this abandoned hospital. But that's not the main story. I've been increasingly getting more interested in lost places and history, thanks to a new teacher when I still went to school. Naturally, I began to look up whether there are lost places nearby, and I saw a blog of someone visiting these lost places to take pictures there. These places were organized based on the states of Germany, as well as rated based on the vandalism that took place there, the general condition of the lost place, whether they've been demolished, etc., and so on. Most lost places that looked somewhat interesting were either demolished or too far away. One of them, though, was about a 2-hour drive from where I lived, heavily vandalized, and generally not in such good condition. But that specific place immediately caught my eye, more than the others did on the blog. The photographs looked okay, I suppose. The story, though, is what had me convinced to go visit it. I checked around for this place, and I even found out more about its past. The place that I'm talking about is an absolutely special hospital that I've grown to love and hate during my visits. This story is about my first visit in a while. Before I begin, though, here's a little bit of history on the hospital. The hospital, which was supposed to serve as an alternative, evasive, or extra hospital of another hospital in a rather big city, was built in 1941 by prisoners that had been captured during the war. Quite a few of these hospitals were built because many feared that the hospitals would be destroyed alongside the bombing of big cities. During the construction, many of the prisoners of war died due to the poor conditions at the place. The bodies were just hastily buried in a mass grave, right next to the complex. In 1943, construction of the hospital was completed. It had 400 beds on offer for patients, and later that year it had 825. The hospital was split up into 2 parts with sections for surgery, X-ray, internal medicine, operation rooms, and a pharmacy, Part 1, and a children's hospital in Part 2. Think of it as small separate cities with flats for nurses and doctors, and pretty much everything, including a kindergarten later on. Near the end of World War II, road traffic was forbidden, leading to more bodies having to be buried at the site of the complex in emergency graves. For a short while, the first part of the hospital was used as a military hospital, and more changes of the profession were to follow. In 1947 and 48, the hospital served solely as a clinic for tuberculosis, and between 1943 to 1948, 341 children had died during care at the hospital. The number of deaths in general is still unknown. After the war, the hospital had 752 beds, and it changed its name a few times. Since 1968, it specifically treated patients with respiratory diseases. After a while, one building of Part 2 was used as a youth home, and still is used in that way. The rest of it isn't as interesting, though it should be noted that some buildings of the hospital were used as a home for the elderly until 2005. I want to add here as well that I don't typically find hospitals creepy in any way. The general vibe of them just sometimes makes me sad when I'm inside one. My first visit occurred in 2018. After searching for the address for a while, I came across one that looked accurate enough and went on my way to that place with a friend of mine. We arrived at the lost place, astonished by the size of the complex. I didn't do a lot of research before that. I just knew that it used to be a hospital and was built in World War II. The address was legit. On our way up from the parking lot to this place, our excitement grew, but so did our anxiety for reasons we didn't know. We make our way onto the complex at the part where the main entrance was before, and the air felt completely dense. My friend felt the same way, but we brushed it off as just being a bit nervous, and we just started walking past some buildings at the entrance, completely focused and being amazed. At some point, my pulse must have slowed down due to me being focused on trying to take everything in that I was seeing, because I noticed that it increased in speed at the buildings where I suspected the patients would have been housed. It felt like there was strong electricity in the air, and it made me even more uneasy. That's when we heard a door slam shut behind us at one of the buildings. We, of course, completely froze at first. The sound came from a building that was already pretty far away from us, and that sound was very loud. There was no wind at all that could have caused the heavy doors to slam like that. The trees didn't move, nor did we hear anything else besides that. Just one door that decided to slam shut all on its own. We nervously chuckled and decided to move closer to the exit. I asked my friend if I should record this visit on my phone, and she agreed. We both turned on plane mode and went our way. Whether it was due to our nervousness, being hyper alert, or something actually being there, we would turn around or stop walking at the exact same time, asking the other one whether he heard that. Sometimes the sounds behind us resembled soft footsteps. Other times, we would hear silent whispers that we couldn't make out. At some point, I began to question my own sanity, but I knew that there had to be something there to make such specific sounds, that my friend would also hear it at the same time. As we walked toward the actual exit and just stopped to look at one building, we heard a very loud bang behind us, making us walk in a very determined way to the main street. This was accompanied by other sounds that we couldn't define back then. Fast forward and both of us are at my place. We grab individual headphones and start to listen to the recording. And boy, was that recording weird. We both enabled plane mode before I hit the record button, but there were so many disturbances in the recording. Distinct sounds like someone coughing, whispers that we couldn't make out, a woman's voice going, shh, breathing, and bleeps. I have to admit that we were freaking out. I was almost crying because I found it to be chilling. We were hearing the sounds of an active hospital. The thing that baffled us the most was the loud bang that made us leave. I swear to you, it wasn't anywhere on the recording at all. This bang was so loud and startled us so much that it made us leave the place, but that didn't pick up. Yet a variety of sounds that we never heard were picked up. You can hear us being startled and agreeing to leave immediately right when the bang happened, but no bang can be heard on the recording. I held my phone the exact same way I had been since I started recording. I didn't put my clothes against a mic and the mics weren't broken. We tested everything after the fact. So we should have been able to pick up that bang, but it's absolutely not there. And I have no idea why that's the case. I work at a small 48-bed hospital. These experiences happen in or near the decommissioned psych wing. IT, in which I work, was moved to this wing, into old patient rooms. At first, I'd hear my name called, often from down the hall or from empty rooms. Thinking someone needed tech support, I would try to locate the caller, but there was never anyone there. Many times I would see people in empty rooms, a patient on a bed, a doctor in a white lab coat next to them. As this was a decommissioned wing, it made me turn around to investigate, only to find the rooms empty. Frequently, there was a male and a female walking together, apparently talking to each other, and they would turn into the room next to mine. I would follow them, only to find that they had entered a room through a closed door, and no one was inside. It was always the same room, too. One afternoon, on a Saturday, I got called in while my 4-year-old daughter and I were downtown. I headed over, but was unable to unlock the notoriously problematic back door to our wing. However, I saw a man coming down the hallway toward me, and I knocked on the door and motioned that I was locked out. He appeared to look right at me, but instead of coming to my aid, made a right-hand turn into the office next to mine. I quickly leaned forward to better see, and hurriedly knocked on the door, thinking he hadn't seen or heard me, only to realize the door to that office was closed. Confused, I thought maybe I had just seen a reflection in the window from behind me, and turned, asked my daughter if anyone had walked up behind us, and she said no. I was able to get the door open finally, and the office was empty. Another time, our wing was fully occupied due to a remodel which displaced some staff. I heard what I thought was a metal cart coming down the hall, and then a tremendous crash, like a dozen pots and pans hitting a tile floor. I jumped up and ran into the hallway, partly to assist, and partly to make sure nobody was hurt. No one on our floor had heard anything. There was no cart, and no disaster. Next, I was called in on New Year's Eve, before midnight. The issue took about 20 minutes to resolve, and since I was going to miss the festivities anyway, I thought I would document my time and head home. Upon entering my office, I noticed the bathroom door was open several inches, which I always keep closed. This wasn't a big deal. Housekeeping had probably left it open while cleaning up. For some reason, I did not close it as I normally would have during the day. As I typed up the incident, a man exited my bathroom. At first I thought perhaps my boss had come to investigate as well, but then why would he have been in my office? As I looked up, the man, just over 6 feet tall and thin, looked over at me in shock, as I must have been doing to him, and then he disappeared. Considering the hour, I noped out of there without finishing my report. The old TVs in the rooms of this wing would sometimes turn on by themselves, just static, as they had no feeds, but I had to unlock empty patient rooms and turn off the televisions occasionally, always with the volume turned up to the max. One other coworker has told me that he has heard his name called when no one is there, has seen the woman walking down the hall but without the man, and the doctor by the bedside, but that's all. Many people report hearing things they can't explain, but no one else has told me that they can see anything. The rest of the hospital has no abnormal activity that we know of. So I'm a week out of the hospital, after spending 2 weeks in there with pneumonia. I have a lot of serious health issues and barely survived my stay, but at the end of my stay, I was woken up at about 4 a.m. by the nurse coming in to give me more antibiotics and change my fluid drip. She left to get a new tube for the drip, and while she did that, I rolled over in my bed. I saw an elderly man standing at the end of my bed, with his hand on the bit at the bottom, and he was just looking out the window. Initially, I thought it was one of the elderly gents on the same board, wandering into my room again. It had happened multiple times, as most of them had dementia or delirium. So I spoke to him and asked him if he was all right, but he didn't respond. I buzzed for the nurse. She came back in a rush, and the man vanished before my eyes, and I believe before the nurse's as well. She stopped and stared for a moment, before blinking and shaking her head, and continuing. I tried asking about it, but she kept telling me that I was just dreaming. But even so, every time she came back into my room, she looked directly at the spot where he'd been standing. I'm not sure what I actually saw that night, because I didn't recognize the man at all. But I know for a fact that she saw it too. So I was working at this hospital called Warring General in Warring, Pennsylvania, about 90 minutes east of Erie. I worked the night shift. I'm a travel RN, so this was one of the hospitals that I traveled to. One night, my floor was so slow that I got pulled down to the CCU to work. Well, that night, my patient rang her call bell at 3 o'clock in the morning. She asked me, "What does she want?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "The nurse that keeps coming in here and standing there in that corner." She pointed to the corner behind the door. I said, "Who? Ashley?" The nurse that I was working with, and I pointed to her sitting in the nurse's station. She says, "No, the other one." Well, there was no other one. It was just the two of us. The patient was a woman in her 50s with no history of mental illness, and she wasn't taking any medication that would make her hallucinate. So I kind of laughed and I said, "It's just us." She just stares at me, so I say, "Okay, well if she does it again, just yell for me and I'll come right in." Her room was 8 feet in front of the nurse's station. So about a half hour goes by and she yells, "See, there you go again." I got up, started walking, and I heard the bathroom door shut. It had been cracked open just a little bit to give her dark room a little bit of light. I walked in and I said, "See, you're dreaming. No one else is here." She says, "No, she's here. She went into the bathroom." So I opened the door, light still on, and there's no one there. Looking confused, I say, what does she look like?" I thought maybe somebody was messing around. It's too dark to tell. I can tell it's a woman, but she's so dark I can't really make out her face. So when she says that, I get a little weirded out. But the night ends and I forget about it. 3 months go by. I get pulled back down to the same unit. I have the same room as before. This time, it's a man in his early 60s. He's a nice guy, alert, oriented, and very polite. The night's going really well. It's about 3 a.m., and his call light goes off, which of course means that he needs something. So I walk in and he says, "You're my nurse, right?" I shook my head yes. He said, "Well then why does that lady keep coming in here and standing in the corner? What is she doing?" What? I almost shit myself instantly. This was 3 months later, in the same room. The same thing. I said to him, "Honestly, I think it's a ghost, sir." And he laughs. I said, "No, really, you're not the first one to say that." I started telling everybody about it then, and I found out that the entire second floor has a nurse that's seen every once in a while. I guess in the 1990s, a nurse who worked up there killed herself. In fact, she shot herself in the second floor bathroom. In 2010, I traveled to Seoul, South Korea while 31 weeks pregnant, flying from Florida in the USA. I was cleared to do this by my OBGYN, but while on the plane, a man was sick, and due to the fact that airplanes use recycled air, I ended up getting a stomach bug, which landed me at Samsung Hospital. I was terribly ill and had doctors and nurses constantly checking in on me every hour. Due to me being pregnant and teetering between emergency C-section and not, it had landed me in the maternity ward for extremely sick women. I can't think of its official name right now. Anyway, I was so used to being woken up all the time, day and night, that I didn't think anything of people constantly needing me to sit up to check on me. My hospital room was a shared one with another pregnant woman. The door was this heavy metal door that was on a track of some kind, basically like a sliding metal door. So at night, it was pitch dark. I don't know what time it was, but I was startled awake to see someone looking at me through my curtain wall. I could see her face through the mesh. Even in the darkness, I sat up to let her know that I was awake and ready to be checked. I was really curious as to why she hadn't turned on my light or come in to check my temperature, check my baby, or anything else. My eyes strained to try to see what she was doing. I noticed that her back was pressed against the wall of the room. Her hair was not in a tight, neat bun like the others, but hung down in strands, slightly covering her face. She looked unwell, and her eyes just watched me, as if she was a mixture of sad and angry. It literally took me nearly 20 seconds to realize that this was not a member of the hospital staff, but a full-on apparition staring at me, and that it must be somebody who recently passed away due to complications with her pregnancy. I had the sudden urge to get my light turned on because I just needed to double check that some random lady didn't come into my room. And as soon as the light turned on, she was gone. From that night on, I kept my TV on for light, and slowly but surely I got better to the point where I was able to go home 8 days later to be on bed rest. The woman was solid looking, by the way. I didn't see her outfit because I could only see her face through the mesh part of the curtain. I will never know who came and visited me that night. All I know is that she was not among the living. For years, my mom worked in a hospital that had been abandoned and recently torn down. She worked there for a long time, and it's the reason that she believes in the paranormal. Nothing too scary happened to her, but the events definitely stuck, because they're always her go-to ghost stories when reconnecting with past coworkers. The first one is one night while cleaning. She was organizing papers in what they called the kitty psych. It wasn't necessarily used as a psych ward, just where they put the kids so that they weren't near the actual ward for inmates. Only her and another nurse were on that floor, and she could hear her in the kitchen doing dishes. Mom was in a small room, so there was no way that she would not have seen somebody enter. She felt the heaviness of a person walking past, and knew that it wasn't the other nurse, because, as I said, she could still hear her in the kitchen. The second incident has a little backstory. When the original owner fell ill, she was in a hospital room in her own hospital, and had to pass ownership to her sons. She was unhappy with a lot of what they did to her hospital, and sadly passed knowing that the building she loved so much was going to go to crap. Well, when she passed, the door to her hospital room would slam repeatedly any time her sons made a decision she didn't like. It went from being terrifying to sort of a joke. When the door would slam, you'd almost always hear a nurse respond with, "Mama Mansour is unhappy with her boys." You could also hear people running in the wards, despite the doors being heavy and unable to be opened without a key. You could stand in the hall and feel the heaviness of people running around you. Maybe not the scariest, but everybody I know loves hearing my mom's haunted hospital stories, so I figured I would share them with you. Last year, I briefly worked at a hospital for the Environmental Services Department, so I was a housekeeper. After a couple of months, I was given a fairly regular area to clean daily, the step-down ICU. Only some of the rooms were monitored by video camera there, typically the ones that weren't in direct view of the nurses' station. My job included cleaning the rooms daily that were occupied, the nurses' stations, the doctors' rooms, and any public bathrooms in the area. I was also responsible for fully cleaning a room when a patient was discharged. One day I was assigned to fully clean one of the rooms that's monitored. It is around the corner from the main nurses' station and close to the end of the hall. After I'm done, I walk around the corner, look up at the monitor streaming the feed from the video camera in that room, and I see somebody standing in the doorway. I immediately go back to see if anybody's there, but nobody is. I go into the room to check for a person, and there's nothing. The room right next door is empty as well, but I check anyway, and there too was nothing. Anybody who had been in there would have had to pass me if they had left the area. I go back to check the screen, and the doorway is empty, so I just continue with my day. About a week later, an elderly woman was brought to said room. I go in to do my daily cleaning, introduce myself to her, and tell her what it is I'm going to do. She seems out of it, pleasant, but not fully there at the moment. The curtains are drawn, so it's fairly dim, but not dark. After I start cleaning, she asks me, "How many of us are in here?" I'm taken aback for a second, but I respond with, "Oh, it's just you and I right now. Do you see someone else?" She just says quietly, "Oh, no, I guess not." I tell her if there's anything at all that she needs, there's a number on the card that she can call, and they can page me directly. I went around the corner to check the video feed, and I didn't see anything, but I had a really weird feeling about it. After that, I made sure to stop by that room a few times a day to check on any patient that was in there. I've had a lot of paranormal experiences in my life. I feel that I'm highly sensitive to them. This one was just one of the most recent ones that really stood out to me. A couple of years back, I was struggling and constantly in and out of mental hospitals. Don't let this make you question my credibility, though. It was just for depression and anxiety stuff. I was never prone to hallucinations or anything like that. But anyway, I was in a hospital that was really, really old. Used to be a farm like 100 years ago. My roommate decided to make a makeshift Ouija board with a piece of paper and a bottle cap. I was like 15 and didn't believe in ghosts or anything, so I went with it, thinking that nothing would happen. I was very wrong. So the two of us sat in our room and we were asking questions. I had had some odd and possibly supernatural experiences at this hospital before, but I still didn't believe before this happened. I was getting exasperated, and I told my roommate to stop messing around and stop moving the bottle cap. Well, she took her hands off, so I was the only one with my hands on it. Then I asked another question. The cap shook a little, but I thought it was just me, because my hands shook. Then I asked a question, and the cap started shooting around and went off the paper. It was just going nuts. Needless to say, I said goodbye. I was completely shocked, and I've been a believer ever since. A friend of mine worked in a hospital. She called me up one day to talk about strange things that were happening. She worked night security, and during this time, an older part of the hospital was being renovated. She would notice things, like the sound of someone walking behind her, equipment being moved around, the doors opening and closing. Doors to patient rooms would jerk open. She was getting scared and asked me to come with her one night. I got permission to walk with her. I saw the doors open and close, and I even heard someone talking in one of the patient rooms. This side of the hospital was closed off. She, I, and one other security guard were the only people there that night. I took a ton of photos and videos. On one of the videos, you can hear footsteps, and on one video, you could see a door creak open a bit, all on its own. All of that was all right, but this scared the hell out of me. During one of the videos, I could plainly see a figure of a woman walk out from a room. She stood next to the nurse's desk. It was very quick. I was moving my phone from side to side. I didn't see her with my naked eyes, so I didn't know to pause. She had a bluish tint to her. She had a jacket, a skirt, and kind of a beehive hairdo, and glasses. My friend showed the picture to some of the nurses. A few of the older nurses said it looked like a girl who used to work there and also died at the hospital. One nurse jumped up. "Oh my gosh, that looks just like Maggie." She said that Maggie worked in the hospital in the early 70s and died there from cancer. I wish I still had the pictures and the videos, but my phone was stolen before I could upload them. But my phone was stolen before I could get all the footage off. Either way, it was a pretty terrifying experience, but kind of cool too. This happened to my mother, who had been admitted to hospital in the summer of 2018 after she was suffering from pain in her abdomen, caused by ulcers in her stomach which were later removed. In her ward, there was one other patient, a very elderly lady, who seemed to be out of it, to be perfectly honest. Her ward had 4 hospital beds, 2 beds facing the other 2 beds across the room, with 2 windows to the far side. One night, my mother remembers a chair which was used by visitors of the patients being opposite her bed. She awoke the next morning to find that exact chair right by her bedside, as if somebody had visited her in the night and left it there in its position. Even if it was a doctor checking up on her, they wouldn't sit down on the chair or leave it there in that position. My grandfather passed away in 1994 and didn't get to see any of his grandchildren. I wonder sometimes, was this my grandfather showing a sign? So my friends and I visited this abandoned place in Slovakia. The asylum was first opened in 1918 as a spa center. Later, it was rebuilt as an asylum and closed in the 1970s. It is said that patients were tortured here and many experiments were done on them. So I took a lot of pictures and recorded about 15 minutes of videos. We've experienced strange sounds. Something made a lot of noise, but we didn't make anything of it at first. After the noise, we said, "Do that again if you're here," but nothing happened. But then as we were leaving, something made a noise behind me, and my friend said he could feel a cold touch on his back. So we finally left the place and looked at the photos. There's something on the photos that I need to debunk, or not. I enhanced the photos already, so you can see better. The links will be in the description. I'd love to hear your opinions about them. I don't know what we saw, but I'd love to debunk it or confirm what it is. Back in the early 2000s when I was a kid, there was a deserted section of the local hospital, waiting to be torn down and rebuilt. My friends and I thought it would be a fantastic idea to climb onto the roof and practice our parkour skills. After about 30 minutes, one of my friends stood on a skylight, and it gave out from underneath him. He just about managed to grab onto the ledge which stopped him from falling. Myself and my other friend then rushed over and grabbed his hands to start pulling him up. And when we did, we noticed a little girl standing on a chair directly in the moonlight, looking up and waving. We pulled our friend to safety and quickly looked back over the side to find that there was absolutely no girl there, and the chair was on its side. We all left pretty quickly after that. We later discovered that that part of the hospital had been used to treat burn victims, and a 6-year-old girl had died there.